Welcome back. Now let's do a quick recap of last week's trading activities and an outlook for the new week with Temple Ashaja. Good morning, Temple. So talk us through the trading week. We saw an increase in the main index by 1.4% week on week last week. Now, what drove those gains?
True. Quite a number of policy actions from the federal government, and of course, that's the global stage. That's what has been pushing up the market lately. Again, you know that the federal government has indicated plans to actually borrow more domestically. So you will see so much of the players, in the local space now, dropping funds across board again, because there's really not so much of outlet at this point to lock down funds in. That's the reason why we're seeing all of those sentiments that we've been seeing in the markets. We saw 1.37% gain last week alone in terms of the equity space, and that's brought us back to the 21,000 psychological line. Of course, if you look at the equity capitalization, in spite of the fact that it was just a 4-day trading week, it was up back to 11.14 trillion naira. Now, if you look at the volume of transactions, things were really, really positive as well. We saw a whole lot of the financial services sector pushing up the volume of transaction that we've seen in this space, especially the banking names, the contributions that we got from Zenith Bank, UBA, FBN Holdings, which is one of the companies that is paying out dividend. All of that was able to help this particular activity level in terms of volume and value, to hit this level. This is almost 20 billion naira worth of transaction for last week only. And of course, there were more gainers in the markets than the losers that we used to have. If you look at the banking segment, we were up by some 12.93%, thanks to the 27% gain that we saw on FBN Holdings, the 27.7% gains we saw week on week on Zenith Bank PLC, and of course a host of other banks, Access Bank. All of the major banks that you have in this space contributed to the gain that we have here, and that's translated to these 12.93% gains. Consumer goods segment of the market, Dangote Sugar is set to merge with Savannah Sugar, and that also got some investors to start looking in that space. That direction was able to rise last week only. Nestle was also up and contributed more to the 650 basis points gain that we have on the consumer goods side of the market. And if you look at the industrial goods segment of the market, this was a bit mixed. There would have been more losses on this space, but for the contributions that we saw from that would be Bois Cement was down last week only. Dangote Cement was also down. But then these losses were moderated by some gains of about 12% that we saw on WAPCO PLC, WAPCO Lafarge. But for the fact that things on this space was actually deeper in terms of Bois Cement's losses and Dangote Cement. That's how we arrived at these. Instead, we would have had some more gains on that space if the size of Lafarge WAPCO was something comparable to Dangote Cement and Bois Cement. For the insurance space, was 0.18% gains that we saw here. This particular sector has actually been moderating the year-to-date losses on this space, and of course, quite a number of the companies there, given the recapitalization and rights issue, primary market activities playing out in the space, and CHI, which is Consolidated Hallmark Insurance, contributed more to the gains that we saw here. Oil and gas segment was negative last week, 4.76% in oil, and of course that's due to the losses that we saw on Seplat PLC. Week on week, Seplat was down by about 10%, and that contributed to these losses that we have here. O&O also did some gains last week, but that was not enough to moderate the level of losses on the sector. And this brings us to the energy market. These are figures for Friday only. We saw that Adover was unchanged, Conoil PLC unchanged. On Friday, we saw this gain, 9.09% on O&O PLC, but that wasn't enough to change the year-to-date performance and, of course, week-to-date performance of the market. On Friday, there was this number, 1% gain on Seplat PLC. Of course, we all know what's been playing out in the oil and gas space, but we do hope that this week, when folks and investors generally, global FPIs and local players start reacting to the OPEC production cuts, that will possibly help Seplat eventually, because they should also be able to put out some more crude oil production. And of course, we know that there was no difference in other segments of the market under the energy segment of the market. NASD OTC, which is the unlisted securities market, was up some 80 basis points, settled at 512.89 billion naira. If you look at the volume of transaction, the key contributors were CSCS, Afriland, and of course, your regular WAMCO, and all of that translated to just a total of 9 deals across board for last week only. Debt side of the market, we got 14 deals on bonds. A lot of investors have been more interested at this point on the short end and, of course, the mid end of the curve. We know that the federal government has indicated plans to do more of borrowings locally, and, of course, that is for them to be able to mitigate the risks that will come on the attendant risk of COVID-19, you know, on the market. So we see investors showing interest around this segment of the market, and of course this paper, 2023 paper, then 2037. This was on Friday. These are figures for Friday, but generally week on week we know that the yields had actually tapered by around 70 basis points or thereabouts. And of course, if you look at the NTB side of things, these are figures for Friday. We know that investors continue to look at the shorter end of the curve as well, because again, OMO maturities and of course auction that took place last week was something that actually helped this side of the market. There was an open market operation auction of about 58 billion naira last week. And we know that, sorry, it was I think it was 48 billion naira last week, and of course we know that they sold off mainly, and of course the yields are basically reduced. Now on the OMO side of things, investors have also been indicating interest, especially the banks who have been playing out well in this space. There's been a shortage of supply in the system, but then again these guys are very positive for the new week. BC.
Temple, talking about being positive for the new week, now give us an outlook for this week.
Oh, quite a number of activities are set to happen this week. We know there will be another auction, open market operations auction this week. I think around 58 billion or thereabouts. Of course, the maturities will be pushed out by the central bank. Now, investors will be looking at that space. These local players have been more interested in this space now because we know that yields are quite attractive as well, even though their demand is beginning to push down the yields for the market. So they are locking down funds in that space, which is also what's happened at the equity side of the market. Again, we know that the OPEC Plus has now reached an agreement that some 9.7 million barrels per day is what they will be doing going forward. And that is a positive signal for a lot of these investors. That's something that they'll be looking at. Don't forget again that Dangote Cement is looking to push some 100 billion naira worth of bonds in the market. The issuance is coming in this month. That's a space that they're watching for this week. I'm sure that a lot of these local players, the PFAs, the custodians, the banks, and all of the treasurers, dealers across board will be warming up for that particular exercise. We also know that the commercial paper of Nigerian breweries, 30 billion naira worth of CPs are out. And of course, that's something that investors will be looking forward to for the rest of the week. If you look at the equity space, valuations remain low in spite of the fact that the activities, the buy and the demand on some of those securities last week has pushed up the prices of some of those banks and, of course, some of those consumer goods companies now. This week, we're likely to still see them come on board as business resumes tomorrow. Those are areas that they will be looking at. We know that Zenith Bank is now 14 naira. FBN Holdings is also more than 4 naira at this point. Look at Nestle, that was for the greater part of last week was down to 750 naira per share. This week, it's something that investors will look at. It's closed at around 800 naira for last week. And so they will come on board. Nestle, for example, actually has a support level of around 1,200 naira. Now it is still 800 and something naira. They will look at that space and be able to pick up those low valuations. And that's what is going to happen on the debt side of the market as well, BC.
Thank you, Temple, for this update. And of course, we'll see how it all plays out at the end of the week. And that's where we end today's program. Thank you for watching. I am BC Adebayo.